you saw in March that something shifted. So this March was like for you the second time around seeing a global financial crisis. I remember we were talking about looking at the BKX. You were looking at the BKX and saying like this is the indicator to watch, the bank index. How were you thinking about were you watching the Bitcoin on exchanges at the time, or like what were you looking at the time to try to make your risk decisions on how to play this financial crisis?
Yeah, well, I wasn't actually looking on the markets very closely at the time. I was, I was on a circuit, So we'd gone to Philippines to go kiteboarding with some friends. I think Tone Vase turned up as well. He did, and we did a live stream there. We went on to the US and Roundtable, and so we were just hopping around the world at the time. Um, and then the whole COVID thing was happening, and you could see that. And by the time we were in the US, it started popping up there, and I was thinking, hmm, I'm a traveler, and like the right thing to do is what Brad is doing there, which is locking down and getting 6 months worth of food and kind of all safety precautions, medical, medicine, water supply, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, where should we go? Shall I go to Hong Kong, where I could, I've got residency in two countries. I could go to Hong Kong, and they will not be a shit show because Asia's demonstrated that they can contain a pandemic. They had SARS, and they were taking it seriously. And then the Western countries would be a shit show because, they were getting all conspiracist about it. But not only that, they just didn't care. No one was wearing masks, but like, I ended up deciding we would go to New Zealand. So we went to New Zealand mainly because I knew it, and I knew where to be. And so more than anything, I remember. Do you remember I called you? I called you, going, running through some options of where to go because this thing's going to go off everywhere. And New Zealand had not declared a lockdown, and they didn't. I don't think they even knew what was about to come. And yet we'd seen all the numbers, and everything was growing exponentially. And so I was much more occupied with that side of things, and I was analyzing COVID numbers at the time more than anything.
So it's kind of similar to when you during the last financial crisis you were doing your traveling around the world
Yeah, it was actually, but
and
it
you
wasn't.
were aware, but now you've got Bitcoin in this world, right? You've got
Yeah,
Bitcoin. You're protected against the next financial collapse. You're not necessarily thinking, well, I'm going to go short the banks and like 5x margin long gold or whatever. You just, I guess at this point, maybe you feel a bit safer because you're holding Bitcoin, which is meant to protect against these situations.
you will remember at the time Bitcoin was crashing, and everyone said this is so uncertain whether or not this would act like a safe haven.
What
Um,
did you think?
Well, I was like, well, I've seen this before. This is a flight to safety. We are going to have a flight to safety. And I even talked about it on Twitter, like back in 2016. What do you think's going to happen if we have a crisis? And everyone said Bitcoin moons, and I said, no, we're going to have a flight to safety. We're going to everything's going to crash, including Bitcoin, and then it's going to bounce afterwards. And so I didn't know where the bottom would be, but obviously that did play out. At the time I was providing analysis to Adaptive Fund, and that was trading leverage over on mainly BitMEX at the time. And as things went south,
Let me comment too, because I was an LP in Adaptive, and we're friends. And I mean, I still love you, and I don't hold any hard feelings. And really, none of the LPs that I knew in Adaptive had any hard feelings towards you. Maybe there was a little bit of like frustration with Murad, but I knew going into investing in Adaptive that very talented team. Willy's like one of the best analysts that there is in the space, so I'm going to bet on you. But I'm also fully aware that the guy that's running the show is his first time running a fund. So there's a real risk of someone that's got a young mindset that is an amazing talent at trading to not be able to 100% react to a world financial crisis, to a black swan event, and the tendency to like use too much leverage or not be able to emotionally take that hit of like a 40% loss or 20% loss. In my calculations when I was deciding how much I was going to invest in adaptive, I was thinking like there's a potential massive upside for this, but there's also the potential for some kind of black swan event to happen in the next few years and for the team that's trading the funds to not properly be able to handle the situation. So I was fully aware that when I invested that I was potentially going to lose all this money. So I kind of capped myself at like 5% or something of my portfolio and thought, wow, well, if they can go 10x this, then that's significant. But I'm going to cap myself at a percentage that I would be okay with losing. Now, when it did fall apart, it was not like lost everything, but I felt more so bad for you. I was like, shit, like Willie had way more money in there than me. And I just kind of felt like as a friend that I should just, who gives a shit about my money? I just want to support you and like make sure that you guys get through this okay. And even Murad, it was like the first letter that went out that got leaked to like the Bitcoin news or whatever. It was like this weird curse, sort of strange letter where he was just blaming BitMEX and saying it probably was BitMEX's fault, like honestly, but it was also he was taking too much risk. But after that, he did send out another letter that was just a private kind of like apology, taking ownership for it and apologizing. And that didn't get leaked out, which it probably should have, because he did show some maturity in the end to the LPs and apologized and took responsibility for it. But that didn't come out. So I guess it just came out.
And at that time, remember, I'm an advisor and I'm sending analysis, but I had no oversight over the trades, and I was just preparing for lockdown, trying to figure out where to be safe for this pandemic. And at the time, I was rung up that the fund got liquidated. Well, not the entire fund, but like about 2/3 of it. And I was, I think, at the time, the second largest investor. And so that all that was happening at the same time as COVID. So
You talked about before that you had taken a lot of risk with your positions in the 2008 cycle. Were you setting yourself buckets of like how to hold your Bitcoin? Were you thinking like this is my speculative at risk Bitcoin that I'll have in adaptive and provide some analysis for the team there to trade with, and then I'm just going to hold like 50% of it myself with the private keys the way it's meant to be held? Or like how did you think about your portfolio in terms of
I had just rough. I had just rough allocations. I always have around 10%. It depends. Up to 20 to 25% at times, depending on trading conditions on exchanges. That's subject to counterparty risk. I always have cold storage, and it's always enough. Um, no matter what happens, if you're wiped out and everything, that should be enough. And then I had a decent buck and adaptive because I felt closer to that team than anything else. And some amount of cash. I had equity in startups because that's my thing. I had like real estate, so I felt pretty safe across everything in a worst case situation. But it's certainly not great when you see your primary buckets, which is Bitcoin and that stuff in a fund that gets liquidated. That was not a good time. Um, for anyone that is trading, when you're going long um, and you're making money, no one likes to have that pain of that number reducing, and so obviously it's not a great experience, but um, I had the experience of 2008 and I'd weathered that. And certainly we had the bear cycle of 2018. So, it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was actually quite good times, because like we had a lot of time in New Zealand, beautiful country to revisit and reestablish.
yeah, you got your RV?
You got my RV, went and caught up with my old friends. It was a good time. It was a good, fulfilling time. and I wasn't so focused on the markets at the time. I knew that there was a hit, and I knew that Bitcoin would climb back. So nowadays I'm like going, well, I'll just trade this myself, and I'll just make back that Bitcoin that I was lost over
Yeah.
over that crisis.
I just wouldn't want people to think that like it was Willy's fault that the thing went down. And now you got this really successful newsletter, which is what you were doing anyways. That's what you were doing. You were providing on-chain analysis, proprietary, really valuable advice for the team that was trading. And for you to be able to kind of like come back and build this newsletter to like the number one successful newsletter on Substack, I think you deserve it. And I think I'm just happy for you as a friend to see that that's how that resolved.
No, thanks, Brad. I mean, I think to Murray's credit, he did take the responsibility of it, and it was interesting in that, like, when he did, the LPs took it very well. They took it very well when he took the full responsibility. I think that, like, Murad's, it's very young. It's a lot to weather the responsibility of that large amount of capital. I mean, it was a great learning experience for everybody involved. I've certainly learned a lot from that. Kind of how to, bounce back. I mean, I think my biggest thing with it was the I think the third of that fund was some of my closest friends that packed money, and they there was a bet on me, um, and so that was probably one of the harder things to endure. It's very unfortunate that size of capital was lost.
Like I know how our mutual friends have reacted. Like they must have been in Bitcoin. Like most of the people that knew you must have already been also holding a lot of Bitcoin, or at least a lot of their portfolio in Bitcoin. With the price action that we've seen, as long as all of your friends have held, and like that's what you've been advising everybody to do since March, was like buy Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is gonna, we're entering a bull cycle. You were calling it, and you were so right. So hopefully everybody that is your friend and followed you bought more Bitcoin, or at least held their Bitcoin through this crazy cycle.
In a way, I think the newsletter came out as a consequence of the adaptive meltdown. I felt a sense of responsibility to my friends to try and do something back, and so we started that group, and I started sending analysis, um, and it started from there really.
Hmm.
I know certain number of people have used that to gain back their losses.
Well, I know I have because you and Michael Saylor were the two people that made me override my rules to become more bullish on Bitcoin and buy more Bitcoin, because my rules tell me to just hold Bitcoin, and I've tried to not be too overexposed to any one asset. But I was feeling the feelings of FOMO in probably mid-November, and when I started to see Michael Saylor talking about how much he's buying, and then you were providing some amazing analysis and showing on chain and showing like this is gonna go, this is real, this is the next mass adoption cycle. So the more I was like reading your newsletter and following Michael Saylor, I was like, maybe I need more Bitcoin. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to buy as much Bitcoin as I had in adaptive. And I felt that at the all time high that I was just going to buy more because the cycle is real. And I did. And now I'm up like 2x on what I lost in adaptive. So, partially thankfully to you, I bought more Bitcoin and I'm up 2x on it.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear, Brad. Yeah, it's interesting how you say because I know that you're doing the strategy where you're buying the tops, and we're having this conversation where, like, if you consider this as a technology adoption cycle, that's exactly what we should be doing. Is we make new all time highs, it's validating this technology, and we should be buying the tops because it's going to get toppier. So, well, to a point, we know the cycle will top out.